Benvenuti, signore e signori. We are going live to Florence, where we will be transported to Siena, the city of Gothic art. I am Isabel, your Roxbury Library Program Coordinator. Welcome, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. We say art history happy hour, so it's maybe a little early for a cocktail or an aperitivo, but if you have the cafe or the tea, that's equally lovely, of course. So Siena, maybe a good time to go into that city if you have travel plans this spring or you're thinking about traveling again. That would be lovely. Anyway, what else? We hope it will inspire you. So just a couple of Zoom rules. Everyone is on mute during the presentation. And if you have any questions, then please feel free to put them in the chat box and we will get to them at the end of the lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome nostra amica Elaine Ruffolo, art historian with a specialization in 15th century Renaissance art. Elaine taught at Syracuse University and Stanford. Both have campuses in Florence. She's also a travel consultant for any travel in Europe. And she has her own virtual platform for art history courses. Elaine, bienvenuta. Thank you for being here again. It's our 4th year.
Amazing. Yes. Okay, I'm going to get started. And let me just share my screen so you can get some beautiful images for you all. There we go. All right, excellent. Oh, no, wait a minute. Sorry. Excuse me, I shared the wrong screen. That's embarrassing. Here we go. Excuse me. Okay. And, excuse me, share screen. Just when you think you've done this a million times. Okay, that should look good. How does that look, Isabel? Well, good. All right, so I'm going to get started. And I would pull your chairs up close to your screens, to the computer, or whatever you're watching this on, because I've really tried to give you some very, very beautiful images. And again, as Isabel said, I'm Elaine Ruffolo. I teach Renaissance art history here, and I'm coming to you from Florence, Italy, where I've been teaching for over 30 years. I taught undergraduates for many years, and now I do only adult education, including academic travel. And Siena, a Gothic dream. Siena is one of my favorite places in the world, one of the most beautiful cities, hands down, in Italy. And it's got this very rich history, which we're going to discover together. And I put this together for you because I was suspecting that many of you are going to start coming back to Italy soon. And hopefully Siena will be on your list. So I was trained as an economic art historian, which means that I follow the money. I take a look at the wealth of the city, the way money's being made, and I try to apply it to the art and architecture. There are different kinds of schools of art history that you might want to consider as you make your way through museums or as you're traveling. There's another school of art history that looks at works of art completely in terms of style. And we'll do that for sure this evening. It's evening for me. It's 9 o'clock in the evening. By looking at the color, the line, the style, and certainly Siena tends to be Gothic. And that's called connoisseurship, or reading works of art in terms of the style in which it was made. And then the third school of art history is looking at works of art in terms of the symbolism. What do things mean? Why do figures in Siena so oftentimes will we use black and white? Who is the figure with, say, arrows being shot in his side? And that's called iconography or symbolism. So I just wanted to give you that really quick intro to art history, because I think it's useful as you go through different museums or as you're traveling to ask yourselves, when you're looking at works of art, the easiest question of them all: do you like it? And that's all about taste. And that's where the term connoisseurship comes in. What does it mean? What's all the symbolism about? And that's called iconography. And the third approach, the one that I follow closely, is called social or economic, socio-economic art history. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we go through Siena, a Gothic dream. And I hope you enjoy these beautiful images that I worked very hard on giving you some gorgeous images. So here we can see the image of Siena. Siena is, as you can see, draped on 3 hills, and it might be the most beautiful city in all of Italy. It is a medieval ensemble of palaces and towers, all cast in a warm burnt sienna color that comes from cooked Sienese earth. The city is dominated by its really stunning zebra-striped cathedral, which you can see in the distance, and punctuated by a kind of exclamation point of the Tower of Town Hall, called the Tower of Mangia. And as you look off at this lovely image, you can see how very quickly Siena turns into rolling hills. There's a nice contrast of the dense urban center with these vast stretches of Tuscan farmland. I mean, it really is a feast for the eyes. The art and architecture, which is combined with a fierce civic pride, and it's a civic pride that is palatable even today, really makes Siena what I like to call a Gothic dream. So let's get into the history of Siena. And for all of its beauty, Siena has no real classical past. It was a rather unimportant center in antiquity. Much more relevant were the 2 towns closest to Siena, one called Volterra and the other at the bottom of your screen called Arezzo. These are both quite nearby Siena. They were originally both Etruscan. The Etruscans were the peoples before the Romans who dominated Tuscany, because the word Tuscany comes from the word Etruscan. And they were the people of about 500 BC, so just before the Romans. They were very sophisticated. They liked to build on the tops of hills. They were great engineers. And one of the most important thing about the Etruscans is they brought the center of Italy into contact with a greater world, and that world would be the world of the Greeks and the Egyptians. Magna Graecia, which is Sicily and of course Calabria, were developed at this time, and the Etruscans were trading with them. So when you think about the hill towns of Tuscany, such as Volterra or Arezzo, they're predominantly founded by the Etruscans. However, Siena doesn't really belong into this whole story, because Siena during the period of about 500 BC was barely a village in the rolling hills. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, now, so let me fill in this space for you. The Etruscans will be assimilated by the Romans. Who are the Romans? The Romans are a kind of a conglomerate of peoples called the Latins, the Sabines, the Umbri, even some Etruscans, and they will come together and they begin their relentless rise to power. And by the time we get to the year, let's say 300, the Etruscans have been completely defeated, and all of these towns are Roman. Then the Roman Empire overextends its border, and the empire will fall in the 5th century AD. Now, that's a lot of history. Maybe that's for another lecture. But realize after the collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, the cities in Tuscany, such as Volterra or Arezzo, or even at that point, Siena, which was just rising up, is going to empty out. It was dangerous to stay in the towns, and people headed for the hills. Nice hills. Isn't that a beautiful picture? So you can see these vast hills, and people head for the hills because of barbarian invasions. Barbarian comes from the term babblers, barbarians. And these barbarians sweep through the center of Italy, and the reaction is you got to get out of town. And you move out into the countryside. And this is how we move into a period called the feudal society. I like this image. It actually comes from Siena, so it's applicable. People move to the tops of hills for protection, isolation. Look at the crenellated wall. Crenellations mean the battlements that are surrounding this. Rather small enclaves, not too many people, maybe a few hundred people who are within those walls. And we call it the Dark Ages because there's not much going on, especially in terms of the economy. Remember, I'll always bring it back to the economy. You're down to a subsistence level living, meaning you consume what you produce and you produce what you consume. And people are worried about leaving. It's almost down to a barter system. And it was dangerous in the countryside. And this is why you see, especially when you're on the outskirts of Siena, driving through the beautiful areas of those rolling hills, you're going to see these ruins here and there. And again, this ruin is just outside of Siena. And the castles were used, as you can see, for lookouts. And it must have been a pretty bleak time where the economy is going to grind down to a halt. Now, that's the period between the very, very beginnings of these Tuscan towns to about the year 1000. And then just, so it's about a 500-year period that we typically call the Middle Ages. What are the Middle Ages in the middle of? The fall of Rome and the very beginning of the Renaissance. Now, right around the year 1000, that's an easy date to remember, trade begins once again, and towns are going to emerge again. And if you will, the lights will come on again. All right, now why? And the reason for this is that the economy gets going again in around 1000. They figured out changes in farming technology, which led to surplus. Surplus leads to trade. Pilgrimage, especially in the year 1000, gets people up and down the peninsula, and you start to see new ideas coming in from the east, thanks to a guy named Marco Polo, and also because of crusades. And we start to see what's called the rise of city-states, and this is when Siena comes on the scene. And this is a wonderful image of Siena, an old woodcut, painted woodcut, so you can get an idea of the city growing up on those three hills. And after this 500 years of darkness, we see that Siena is going to come into its own. Okay, why? Now, Siena is making money specifically because of her location. And here you can see the Italian peninsula. And I just circled the image of Siena. And these little red dots that you see, everyone, is along an old road called the Via Francigena. You can see the root word of that, Francia. It's the old road that would lead from Rome all the way up to France and then Canterbury. Now, this is important because it reflects the importance of pilgrimage at this time. Here are the pilgrims. Pilgrims. This is a spiritual journey that goes on, especially in about 1000, because it was a holy year. They thought either the world was going to end or they better get on some kind of a pilgrimage. Just like 2000, for those of you who remember 2000, Y2K, this is Y1K. And these pilgrims, they're preferably you want to go to the Holy Land, right, to Jerusalem, but it's dangerous. So people have to go to places where many saints are buried, that is Rome. And right here, you get something called the cult of saints. All up here, the cult of relics. Different saints are buried up and down the Italian peninsula on the Via Francigena, attracting pilgrims. Now, I don't want to be flip about a spiritual journey, but it brings a lot of money into the different places that the pilgrims will stop, especially Siena. And Siena will have important saints such as Ascano, Savino, and then eventually she has, of course, the head of St. Catherine of Siena, but that's late. I'm talking about these early saints. Location is important because it attracts pilgrims. All right, now, so this Via Francigena passed through the Elsa, the Arbia River Valley, and it became Siena a principal stopover point. Stopover, and then of course they need a hotel room, they need a plate of pasta, they need to buy some trinkets, and it's lucrative business. Then, that's not enough. Siena becomes, by the end of the 1100s, the Sienese were major bankers. Bankers, of course, because they want to trade money from Rome as you're making your way up. And by 1170, the Sienese were minting their own coins and became important bankers. That's the coin of Siena up above. Here at the bottom, you can see the medieval bankers. Let me get in close for you because it's a great image. And here you can see the Sienese bankers who are making a rate of exchange. They're making a rate of exchange from behind a low wooden table. And you can all see that the table is made of wood. The artist here, who's anonymous, has gone to great lengths of painting in the grains of wood. You can see the nails. And these characters would make the rate of exchange from behind a low wooden table, which was called a banco, which is where we get our word bank today. And if one of those bankers cheated and overcharged interest or broke a rule, they would bust up their wooden tables. And the word in Italian for broken table is banco rotto, which is where we get our word bankrupt. Love this image, as you can see. So it's not a bank in the way that we think of it. It's a table, a place for a rate of exchange. And here's a little detail up at the top. There's Jesus Christ saying, don't charge too much interest. So business was really, really good. And because of that, people will flock to Siena and towers are built, reflecting the commercial activity. You start to see towers built by very powerful banking families, such as the Tolomei, the Salimbene. And each family is trying to put forth their importance by building the biggest tower. But Siena, unlike Florence, was very smart. At a certain point in 1250, they didn't allow the families to outdo each other with the height of the towers. They made everybody keep their towers down to the same height except for town hall. And it evens the playing field. So already in those early days, the Sienese were trying to give an idea of not individuality, but the city of Siena as something special. And that's even the case today. Italians in general are incredibly individualistic. They think about first their family, then their neighborhood, and then maybe they feel like the Italians. I always think that the only time Italy really feels like it's part of Italy is during the World Cup, but otherwise it's all individual. But Siena always had this real sense of civic pride, as it should. And pretty soon at this period in the 12th century, we start to see the wealth on banking. And then, of course, its location. And that's the time when we see the towers built, fountains, churches, city gates, and things were looking really good with this terrific sense of civic pride. The population by the time we get to 1200 is 60,000 people. That's a large city for the late Middle Ages. And of course, so prideful was Siena that she came up with a classical past. Now, remember, I told you, Siena was not a classical center. She was not founded by the Romans nor the Etruscans. She was just a little tiny village. But she does what any good Sienese would do. She's going to make it up. And she comes up with a wonderful whopper. If you remember the story of the foundation of Rome in 753, Romulus and Remus were born in 753. They're twins. They grow up and Romulus kills Remus and we have the foundation of Rome. Otherwise, I guess we would have Rome. But the Sienese take that old story, the image you're looking at on the left-hand side, you think is Romulus and Remus, but instead they make up a little coda to it. And it turns out that Remus had two sons, one named Sienus and the other Ascius. And after Remus was killed by his brother, the two young boys escaped Rome by heading north, one on a black horse and the other on a white horse. And that's how Siena was founded, giving rise to the black and white shield you can see on the right-hand side. And the image, when you're in Siena, here and there, you'll see these two boys, Sienus and Ascius, who are being suckled by a she-wolf, a kind of rendition on the whole story of Romulus and Remus. And here's one of the beautiful inlaid pavement designs inside the Cathedral of Siena, showing us Siena in the center with all these other Roman towns. I always think this is interesting because Rome, I mean, Mother Rome of all things, is over here at 3 o'clock, and right in the center is Siena in the very, very center. All right, so this is a real period of civic pride and wealth and building, but there is another important town in Tuscany, Florence, which transformed from a Roman wreck called Florencia into a thriving center on the Arno River. There's a good image of Florence at the end of the 15th century. You can see the city is wealthy. I can see bridges. I can see, look at it a little closer. Look at the cathedral here being, here's city walls. The river Arno runs right through it. Both sides of the river are incorporated into the urban fabric. Look up into the hills and you can see towers and farms in the distance. And Florence was really thriving at the same time that Siena was thriving. And the rivalry between Florence and Siena is legendary, and it goes all the way back to about 1200. They are vying for economic power. The rivalry between Florence and Siena, even today, is famous. If you go to a soccer match between Florence and Siena, the Sienese fans will chant, "Remember Monteparti." The Battle of Monteparti was 1260. I mean, get over it already. There's a very much alive and well, the sense of superiority between one and another. So it's really a tale of two great cities, two great city-states of the 13th century vying for power in this region of Tuscany. Here's another image. Now, politically, I always think this is interesting as well. So at this period, well, this map is a little late for us, but it hadn't changed that much from the 13th century. Italy is like a great quilt of different kinds of political entities. I want you to think of it like this. At the very north, beyond Italy, is the superpower called the Holy Roman Emperor. And then the other superpower will be the Pope in Rome. He's still in Rome at this point. See him down here? Here are the Papal States. Then we got a Kingdom of Naples. Then we have a Republic of Venice, which is really run by just 1% of the population. I got a couple of duchies, meaning that duchies are run by dukes. And then right here, next to each other, we have the Republic of Florence, and we've got the Republic of Siena, meaning that it's run by a select number of male citizens. You had to be over 27, you had to belong to a guild, and you had to have no debt in order to vote or hold public office. And it really worked in both Florence and Siena, who had similar constitutions, republics. Now, that is the political situation here. Again, a tale of two great cities. And then, as you see from this other map I've popped up, that they are geographically quite close to each other. And you see it's just Florence due south, Siena or north. By car, it's only, I would say, an hour and 10 minutes away. So let's factor it in. Position. Siena is on the Via Francigena and Florence is on the Arno, so easy enough for trade. Siena was aligned with the Holy Roman Emperor in the north, that superpower. Call them Ghibellines. Don't worry about it. Just means they're for the Holy Roman Emperor. And Florence is aligned with the papacy. They were called Guelphs. Siena is filled with bankers and traders. Florence, a little bit more diversified, also bankers, but also textile workers and lawyers and apothecaries, a little bit more diversified than Siena. Siena has 60,000 people and Florence has 100,000 people. And geographically close, and the lines are clearly drawn and hostilities boiled over in the year 1260. Wow, that's a beautiful picture, as you can see. It's the two armies are going to meet, Siena versus Florence, in this beautiful valley, which is called Monte Parti. Monte Parti. It's absolutely beautiful, but it is the scene of one of the bloodiest battles of the Middle Ages, with more than 10,000 fatalities in one battle, which is astonishing. Even Dante, when he wrote the Divine Comedy, would remark that the river Darbia, the river outside of Siena, ran red with the blood of the Florentines. So at this point, the Sienese knew they were doomed. Here's another image. This is a 19th century kind of romantic image of the Sienese who are saying goodbye to their loved ones. You can see Siena in the background. The children are wailing. The women are holding the men. The Sienese knew they were doomed. They were outnumbered 2-1 by the Florentines and also Florentine allies. And the Sienese needed help, and they got it. They threw the keys of the city onto the altar of the Virgin Mary and dedicated the city to the Virgin Mary, imploring her divine intervention. They said farewell to their families. The men went out to be massacred, very brave, but because of a well-developed battle plan, or because of a surprise rear flank attack, or because the sun was in the eyes of the Florentines, or because of the Virgin Mary's intervention, lo and behold, much to everybody's surprise, Siena won. As I said, Dante said the river Darbia ran red with the blood of the Florentines. Battle of Monte Parti, 1260. You can see the Florentine troops on the lower left-hand side with the fleur-de-lis, and up here is, of course, the Sienese, and they won. Which was astonishing. I always say that one of the reasons why the Sienese won is at this point they had just developed a very special cake, which some of you will recognize, called panforte, which means strong bread, and it's filled with nuts and sweetmeats, and it's round, and it weighs about 5 pounds each one. And it's said that they were able to beat the Florentines because they put this in their round satchels. They were able to eat a little bit of it. I always think that they probably used it and threw it at the Florentines' heads because it's very, 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 very heavy. But that's the lore that goes back to the story of the Panforte. All right, so because of this victory, for a period of time, the Sienese had defeated the Florentines. And I'll tell you, the Florentines never forgot it. And it ushers in what we're going to call the golden age of Siena, with wealth, a building boom, a terrific sense of civic pride. And I'll give you the dates of this period of the golden age of Siena. We're going to call it 1260 with the Battle of Monte Parti to the year 1348. And of course, the Sienese are going to celebrate. And one of the first ways to celebrate is to thank the Virgin Mary for her intervention. She dedicates the city to the Virgin Mary. It's all Virgin Mary iconography. You're going to see that as we go through. And she decides that the Cathedral of Siena needs to be redone to reflect the importance of the Virgin Mary, but also the importance of Siena. And the cathedral is begun. And here it is from afar, Siena Cathedral that dominates. This is the back of the cathedral. It's at the very highest point of one of the three hills of Siena. You can see it from miles away. with its bell tower looming over the city in this typical black and white stripes. Now you remember why it's black and white, because of Sienus and Ascius. And it is truly one of the very best expressions of Gothic architecture in Italy. And there are not many examples of Gothic architecture in Italy because of the strong tradition of Roman architecture. Usually get kind of a watered down version of Gothic architecture, but Siena is an exception. I mean, you don't see flying buttresses, but you do have this sense of decoration, lightness, kind of glimmers in front of you. And two other churches that always come to mind at that point would be the Duomo of Siena, 1263, the Duomo of Orvieto, 1280, and then the Duomo of Milan. Now notice I called these Duomos. Duomo and cathedral are interchangeable. Duomo comes from the word domus Dei, which means house of God, and cathedral comes from the word cathedra, which means the seat of the bishop. Therefore, it's the most important church in the center typically, and it's where the bishop sits on his cathedra. There's more than just a religious significance, it's also the idea of civic pride. Now, the Duomo of Milan down here in the lower left, I mean, one reason the Duomo of Milan is interesting is because it is definitely got this French feel to it, but the bones are actually Romanesque. And again, because we're close to France up in Milan. The Duomo of Orvieto, again, I see pointed arches here, but when you really look at it, the bones are Romanesque. The Duomo of Siena in the center, you can see is a hybrid of both of these things, making it a quintessential Sienese building. All right, let's look a little bit more and read this. It's truly one of the best expressions of Sienese Gothic architecture. And it was designed initially in 1266 by an unknown architect, and then finished off by the Pisano brothers. So let's start looking at this together. Now I'm going to do an analysis of the architecture. Now you have the background. Let's get a little bit closer there. That's a good picture. And the bottom of this building is set up on a rather tall flight of stairs. And then I can see 3 arches, which are capped with these pediments up on the top, and they're recessed in. The bottom of the facade is rather heavy-handed. It's sculptural. I can see twisted columns. I see sculpted columns, recessed in, and here and there, all kinds of wonderful architectural details as well as sculpture. There's as much sculpture on the bottom section as architecture. Notice how the pediments break into the upper section of the building. And as we move up, there's a lighter and lighter look to it. Big rose window surrounded by very elegant, fine sculpture to the top with a mosaic, which is the coronation, of course, of the Virgin Mary. And when you look at this and go back just for a moment, you see how much Siena was looking back at Orvieto. Orvieto, so the Duomo of Siena was started in 1263, and that first bottom section is done. Meantime, the Duomo of Orvieto is being constructed, and Siena looks back at Orvieto and changes the style. So there's a difference between the upper part of the building and the lower part of the building. And now that I've pointed that out, I hope you can all see this. Then just some details here, really encrusted with colorful marble, sculpture, mosaics, stained glass window. You don't know where to look first. And what's so fascinating about the exterior of this building is what you see on the exterior really prepares you for the ornate interior. Are you ready to step inside with me? I mean, wow. That is fabulous. Look at that interior. You don't know where to look first. It's completely covered with marble, real marble. That's not paint. It's all inlaid marble in black and white, the Sienese color. The floors are all done in inlay, telling different stories from not only religious images, but also from antiquity. Let me see if I can get you in a little closer. And here, if you lean over, these are all a whole series of popes' heads. It's a little bit creepy, starting with Linnaeus and going all the way to Eugenio. Then you look up and you see 4-part groin vaults, striping every inch. There's no quiet place to rest your eye. And the term for that is horror vacui. I just popped it up at the top of your screen. Horror vacui translates to fear of empty places. More is never enough inside the cathedral. There's another view giving you this different bird's eye view. Chapels on the left and right-hand side. Inlaid floor, striping again. What the striping does that's so interesting is it makes the architecture disappear because your eye gets caught up on all that striping. And as you look down the nave with me, perspectively, those columns seem to fuse together. And then the striping picks up so that the lines blur, and it's difficult to try to imagine where the architecture begins and where the decoration begins. Fabulous view. Here it is looking up. 4-part groin vaults. There's simply 2 Roman arches that are crossed and peaked and with a blue starry sky. Okay, so this is the decoration on the interior. Now, a big major part of this is the celebration, as I said, of the Battle of Monteparti, 1260. And in 1308, specifically October 9th, 1308, the head of the cathedral workshop signed a contract with the most important artist in Siena. His name is Duccio di Insegna. They wanted Duccio to make an unforgettable altarpiece to go inside this tremendous space. And of course, the image is going to depict the Virgin Mary, which was, again, because of the dedication to the city. And here it is, the great Duccio's Maestà, which is today inside the Museum of the Cathedral of Siena. I always think it's a pity that they took it away from the high altar, but that's a whole nother topic, that is the change of taste. But one thing that's really interesting, because this altar, the high altar inside the cathedral, was occupied a freestanding position under the dome, it was painted on both sides. Here, let me show you. So here we are back inside again. And imagine when Duccio painted this in 1308, you would walk down the main nave and there, right there, would be the altar piece. I'll come in closer. Obviously, I've just done this as a montage, but I wanted you to get an idea of where this thing would have stood, not way back, but instead about 3/4 towards us. And depending on what the feast day was, you could walk around to the back, or the monks could see it from the back, and we, the worshiper, could see it from the front. And the other thing I think that's so interesting is that this very bright colors, the gold, for example, set up against all and that elaborate gilded frame, all set up against the black and white and the light that's streaming in through the windows. I think Duccio is doing a wonderful job at competing with the architecture and, of course, the light. As I said, unfortunately, they took it out of that position and they put it inside the museum of the cathedral. I can't really remember when they did that. Maybe it was probably around the 17th century during a period of the taste for the Baroque. But now let's look at the fabulous Ducio's Maestà, one of the great works of art of the late Middle Ages. So the word Maestà means majesty, and the date of this is 1308 to 1311. For those of you who know your art history, Duccio would be a contemporary to Giotto, also a contemporary to Dante, and later on Boccaccio. So this is what we can call the dawn of the Renaissance. When this thing was made when it was finished up in 1311, it was declared a national holiday. And they celebrated it by carrying the whole thing, the whole structure from Duccio's workshop all the way to the high altar. And this painting was once the largest altarpiece ever painted in Italian art history. Now, when you see it today, it's inside the Museum of the Cathedral, and it's very somber. You walk inside a very kind of a dark room, as if you've come to pay your respects, kind of feel like you're walking into a funeral parlor. And what we see is one large panel. That's what I'm showing you now. But keep in mind, here's a bigger view. At one time, it would have looked like this. Now, this is a kind of a reconstruction, trying to put together everything that's now missing from it. It was 16 feet high by 16 feet wide. Therefore, it's not only a painting, it's a wonderful construction of wood. What happened in, again, the 17th and 18th century and 19th century is they dismembered it. They sawed it up, they cut the tops off, they even cut it right down the middle, even hitting the face of the Virgin Mary, and they sold it off. And there are parts of this beautiful, beautiful painting that are all over the world, including Washington, D.C., Fort Worth, Texas, the Frick, the National Gallery in London, have pieces of Duccio's Maestà. I always think it's just amazing that the CNEs would have allowed this to happen. But again, I guess a sub-theme for us is going to be the whole history of taste. So contemporaries will describe the procession that it was done. It was placed to replace the Madonna of the large eyes, and made a new place for her. Everyone, the priest, the bishop, went in a solemn procession accompanied by the signori, the officers, the comune, the people of Siena, all following to follow the Virgin Mary to her new home underneath the dome of Siena's cathedral. Okay, now let's break it down and read this thing iconographically. So what I just did is I placed this altarpiece in a context of the importance of the city of Siena and the economic wealth of Siena. Now, let's look at it iconographically, meaning what's going on in this painting. As I said earlier, it's called Maestà, meaning the Virgin in majesty. And she is in heaven. I can see that because she's seated on this elaborate throne. Duccio's not interested in perspective because you see that the two sides of the throne open up for us, although he attempts a little bit of perspective down here. So let's read this from bottom to top. Okay, so here we can see somehow her gorgeous gown is falling over the step. Then we move up and we can see that she's been placed very carefully on a decorative cushion with golden drapery between her blue mantle and throne. This blue is painted with what's called lapis lazuli, a very expensive pigment that comes from ultramarine. The red here comes from vermilion, almost as expensive. And then, of course, a great plethora of gold. Then here's Christ, who's looking out at us, looking a little bit more like a mini man than anything else. You won't see Christ looking like a baby until we get into around the 16th century. Mary is again bowing, towards her son. Again, because this thing was so terribly cut up and over cleaned, it's hard to make out her features. Her face is rather green. The reason for that is that she was over cleaned, and we're looking at the undertone of her skin, called verdaccia, or bad green. She tilts her head somberly towards her son, takes her fingers and just toys with his lovely purple pink drapery, looking out at us, this lovely sense of human emotion, looking a bit like a Russian icon. We're right here on this transitional period of Byzantine art and Renaissance. Then if you back up a little bit, you can see that Duccio does give us a sense of space with the 4 figures in the front. This is going to be Sant'Anzio, Sansovino, San Vittore, and Ascano. Those are the 4 early patron saints of Siena. And see what he does with the color. Look at the red against this red, the gold against the gold. He uses the colors to set up a rhythm. And these figures are kneeling down. Then in the second row, you can see iconographically who is who. Starting over here, that's got to be Saint Agnes, because she's carrying this image of a lamb. This has got to be Peter, because I can see keys. This has got to be John the Baptist, because he's wearing that hairy outfit. And then we have 2 angels who are kind of protecting. I like the way their eyes shift in their sockets. And then over here, this one is kind of hanging out, looking naturalistic. This one looks right at us. And then we have, this has got to be John with one of the books of the Bible. This is going to be Paul with his sword. And over here is going to be St. Catherine of Alexandria. The reason why I know it's Alexandria instead of St. Catherine of Siena is because St. Catherine of Siena has not been born yet. Then the next row, angels. And notice the way Duccio doesn't just give us a series of angels' heads, but their eyes shift back and forth, giving us a sense of variation. And it helps us move across the composition. Then up here we have the 12 apostles. Now Duccio took so much pride that in fact, he even signed it. What it says in that red lettering underneath her pedestal is Holy Mother of God, be the cause of peace to Siena and of life to Duccio, because he has painted thee thus. That's just terrific. It's rare to see something, an accreditation of the artist, Duccio's name, right there on the front of the painting. And here's a nice close-up of her. You can see where it's been cut through right in the center. Here's another detail of St. Agnes. Very lovely, lovely painting. And one of the best parts is that it's painted on the other side. Remember, you walk around it, and this is what the monks would see, or the priest coming behind it. I'll just show you a couple of details. Here is entry into Jerusalem. It's Palm Sunday, which is coming up. Christ is shown here on a donkey with all of his followers. Duccio tries to give us an idea of a crowd scene. And this is called worm's eye view. He flips up the background, and you can see these people pouring out of the gates of Jerusalem. There's even a wonderful little image of a child that looks like he's peeking out of this porch. This is called a sporto. Sporto, it's an overhang that you would see in, say, Siena. Then these children, up here, they're pulling down branches. See them? They're pulling down branches because they're going to cover the pavement so that Christ can come in and walk on top of the branches. So that's Palm Sunday, of course. Christ is bigger than the other figures because he's the most important. And Duccio's given us this very elegant golden line that we follow. Okay, now you see where I am here. This lower, and that is, it takes up 2 spaces in this is called the Passion of Christ. So enter into Jerusalem, washing of the feet of the apostles, Last Supper, betrayal of Judas all the way across. but this is taking up two sections, almost like the first letter inside a manuscript. This is important, and it kicks off the whole cycle. Show you a few more. This is Last Supper, and notice the detail it gives us with this curtain that's looped around this hanging section at the top. Notice also how Duccio has even given us the pattern on the tablecloth. I mean, isn't that amazing? And we see the kind of pitcher, the glassware, the knives. This has got to be Judas. He's ready to eat the bread before Christ can bless it. John the Beloved, and they're all seated around the entire table together. Let's do another one. Kiss of Judas. Reaches over, he'll betray Christ, of course, for 30 silver coins. And Duccio's able to convince us that we have this kind of menacing scene where their eyes are all close together. Here's Peter, who's cutting off the ear of a Roman soldier. There's the apostles running away. And you can see that's right here in the center. And then at the top is crucifixion, where he isolates Christ in the center, the good thief, the bad thief, and the women on the left and the men on the right open up like a beautiful wave where we see Christ right in the center. So this is the back of Duccio's Maestà, one of the greatest works of art from the late Middle Ages. Okay, so that's at the cathedral. Now let's get away from the cathedral and let's go down to the Palazzo Pubblico, what might be the most beautiful piazza in Italy. This is an image of Siena. There's the cathedral at the top part, the highest point. And at the lowest point is this piazza, which is called the Campo. They don't usually call it a piazza. It's known as the Campo, just the Campo. And here it is. The Campo of Siena, the building that dominates this square is the Palazzo Pubblico, which you see on your right-hand side. And it's been the seat of the government of Siena for the last 7 centuries. It was built as town hall in 1297, just about the same time as Florence's town hall, and it still serves as town hall today. It, at the time, was the place for the governing body of the 9. Remember, Siena was a republic. It held the executive branch of the government called the 9. And right away in 1297, they started to pass zoning laws, imposing a rule that all the buildings built on the Campo had to be made of the same material. Here we go. It's on the other side, that beautiful Sienese brick, and have a similar style as town hall, with triforial arches, crenellations. Unfortunately, they were later modified, so it doesn't have a perfect consistency, but you can see that it has a uniform feel to it. And the tower, which is called the Tower of Mangia, to eat, because the idea was that the guy that had to climb up the bell would kind of like eat his way all the way up the bell. And here from the top of the Mangia Tower, you can see the Campo, which is divided like, the sections of an orange in 9, reflecting the idea of the 9, the governing body of this. And the Palazzo Pubblico has always been the center of political life in Siena. It's interesting that it was built at the lowest part of the city, but sets up like a beautiful stage set. It's the focal point of the city. And here again, held the government. It held a prison, the prison for political dissenters. And it also was a place over here on the right-hand side. See where the stone is a little bit different, doesn't have that brick? This stone down here is called travertine. And there's the black and white again. Travertine, behind those doors, that's where they would keep salt. Salt, which was brought in from Maremma, which is just on the coast. And, well, you can imagine how important salt was for preservatives, for preserving meat or fish. You're worth your weight in salt. And so all of this was going on for the life and the good of the Sienese. Now let's step inside. I'm going to show you a couple of rooms. This is one room, one of my favorite rooms. It's called the Room of the Nine. It's kind of this image where you can see the Virgin Mary. Here's a close-up. This was done by Simone Martini. Simone Martini would have been a great follower of Duccio. And the painting is not in great shape because remember I told you they stored salt in this building. Through capillary action, the salt crept up the walls and kind of, poked all the fresco off the wall. Simone Martini paints this in 1318, and then he goes to Avignon for a while because meanwhile the Pope had gone to Avignon, and then he comes back in 1321 to repaint parts of it because of the loss of the salt. And stylistically, now I'm doing connoisseurship, you can see the difference between 1318 and 1321. Look, Peter, that's 1318. This angel, 1321. John, 1318. These figures here, 1320. They're more French looking, aren't they? They're a little bit more elegant because, after all, Simone Martini had spent some time in France. So you see that the artist was inspired by the French style. And this is the other side of the room. But I want to go into my favorite room, which is one of my favorite rooms in all of Italy. It's called the Room of the Nine. And Sala dei Nove. Think of it like this. It's a kind of medieval Siena's Oval Office. This is where all the major decisions were made inside this comparatively small room to the one we were just in. And the elaborate fresco cycle, which is actually under restoration right now, should be opening very soon, was done by Ambrogio and Pietro Lorenzetti between 1338 and 1340. And it's known as the allegory of good and bad government. Very rare to see an allegory. That is, it's not Christian. There's no Virgin Mary up here, even though we know how important the Virgin Mary was to Siena. She was in the other room, after all. This is all an allegory to underscore the benefits of good government and the dangers of bad government, to inspire and influence the nine, the executive committee of, so it's governmental, but it's also reminding you to do good work, buon comune, good for your citizens. And it's just, it's extraordinary how relevant these images are even today. And it breaks down as good government on one wall and the effects of good government. Then bad government on the other wall and the effects of bad government on the facing wall. And let's go through this because I think you're going to find it really interesting. Here is the allegory of good government, okay, done in 1339. Again, you're not going to see any Christian iconography. Everything is an allegory, starting on our left-hand side, and I'll give you some close-ups. Starting over here on our left-hand side, we are going to see a large female figure called Justice. Now, why are there so many female figures up there? Because the word in Latin is a female gender, justitia, pace, magnanimity, temperanza, charity. The words in Latin are feminine, therefore they're female figures. So she is over here, and then comes peace and magnanimity and prudence, and here is an image of good governments. Okay, all of this. Now let's get in close. I'll show you detail. Here we go. So this is the figure on the far left-hand side. And you can see it is justice, justitia. She doles out justice. Over here on the left-hand side, you're going to see that this one's doling out punishments and keeping the plates, two weighing plates, nice and even. Then over here on the right is distributive justice. Then up above, you can see that she is always being advised by sapienza, which means wisdom up at the top. There's wisdom flying over her. And then right below, you see concord, concordia. I'll try to get in a little bit closer. Sometimes if I get in too close, it gets blurry. Yeah, you can see this well. So let me go up to, here she is. At the top, we can see wisdom, sapienza. Down below is our image of justice, and on the scales, doling out the right kind of justice. Then here you see concordia, and concordia is passing, or justice is passing a rope to concordia, see? And the rope goes to, by the way, concordia carries something that's called a carpenter's plane, because she smooths things out. And she hands the rope that she's gotten from justice to the first of 24 men, who of course represent the community of Sienese men. See, they're all in kind of contemporary garb, as you see. And we follow them, and they each carry the rope from one to another as they lead us to the male figure. Here he is, who is wearing half black and half white. So that's got to be an allegory of Siena. He's a male figure, of course, in this case, because it's the city of Siena, dressed in half black, half white. He holds a shield, and I know the shield's not in great shape, but you can just make out that there's the Virgin and Child on the surface of the shield. And there are letters around his head, CSCV, Comune, Siena, Civitas, Vergine, is what it means, for the commune and the city of Venice, of Siena, dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And he's being advised by, of course, faith, hope, and charity running across the top, the personification of good government. Here's where he stands now. Around his head flies, as I said, faith, hope, and charity, of course. Flanking him are other virtues. There are 6 in all. Starting at the left, we begin with this absolutely beautiful, sensuous, reclining figure in gossamer clothing in green. That's peace. Isn't she lovely? Clearly taken from classical antiquity. I love her green drapery. You can see her breasts. You can even see her belly button, for goodness sakes, the swell of her thighs. She reclines easily on a cushion and is identified by the words pax, peace. Underneath the cushion, if you look carefully, I can see all kinds of armor, and she holds an olive branch, a symbol of peace. Then next to her is going to be, whoops, let's get rid of her. Then comes fortitude, then comes prudenza. I got another detail here. There she is. Fortitude, clearly shown. There's a woman with a shield. Then I see prudenza, who holds a scroll with the words past, present, and future on it, in order to make an informed decision on the present, which affects the future. Then comes magnanimity, and the greatness of the soul, and then finishing up always with justice. So these are all the ingredients you need to have a good government. So to put all this together: wisdom, peace, prudence, concord, magnanimity, justice, and here is the result, the effects of good government. Wow. And it is an amazingly accurate portrayal of 14th century life in Siena. This is what good government can achieve. You have these on the lower left-hand side, you can, in the middle, you've got these dancing girls. So it looks like life is pretty nice. I can also see over here I'll get in a little closer for you. I can see a bride who's got a crown on her head. Young girls married early. The dancers are probably in some kind of a celebration. You can see that they're singing as well. Then you also see other things going on. These young men are discussing something. Maybe they're notaries. Legal transparency. Nothing is hidden in good government. There's a professor at I always love this image when my students would listen to me carefully. I would always come to mind, see how the professor is speaking, and those students are so keen And here there is a cobbler with all of his wares being sold. Here again, the cheesemaker. I can see peasants. I see buildings. This is what, and then looking at the buildings, so interesting. Look at, there's a little bird cage up there, colorful. Oh, look, everyone's busy repairing the roof. Things look really good. And you can leave the town and you end up out in the countryside, where things are the rolling hills out there. You can see the different fields that are planted. These characters are going out. They're falconry. I can tell because they're holding falcon. And that's interesting because it tells us that there is leisure time. And behind the horses, I can see a paved road, which tells me that things are safe. Here's a peasant bringing in a cinta sinese, still a specialty for pork in Siena, and the peasants are all working in the field. So this is a great period of time in Siena, and this is what can happen with good government. So what can happen with bad government? And that's what you get, bad government on the left-hand side, opposite wall, the bad government and the consequences of bad government. It's kind of a negative reinforcement that this is what could happen if you do not rule well. Tyranny has replaced good government. I'll get in closer. Here we go. So rather than Siena sitting there in the center, what do we have? It looks like Dracula, but it's actually tyranny. You can just make him out. Let me give you a close-up. Wow. His eyes are crossed. He's got horns, for goodness sakes. I mean, that is just an incredible image. Go back. There he is, seated there. And under him is a goat, an animal associated with Satan. And around tyranny's head flies vices. So rather faith, hope, and charity, you get avarice, superbia, which means pride, and vainglory. See the figures. I'll try to come in a little closer so you can see the details. This is avarice. See the money bags, superbia. Has taken the yoke off, and vainglory, staring at herself in a mirror. And then you see below are figures on the far left, cruelty. It's got this one's holding a child and torturing him with a serpent. Treason, a traitor holding a hybrid animal with the head of a sheep and the tail of a serpent. There's fraud, an attractive woman, but really a man. Fear of fervor or anger, which is kind of a half bear, half horse, and division. And of course, here is the results. And the wall is heavily damaged because it was once an external wall, but you can still see soldiers are here carrying away a woman. Bottom. This woman has been killed and is on the ground. Instead of building, everything's falling apart. There's no longer the rule of law. It's instead the rule of might. And the only people who dare exit the city walls are soldiers that you see on the left-hand side. And the only business that is active is the business of the armor makers. And what rules is fear. And these are the results of bad government and the consequences of bad government. Here's fear. Timor at the top with this woman with a, I always think this is just so timely. What they were learning in the late 14th century is certainly what we could learn right now. All right, so those are fascinating images of Siena. The cathedral, everything looks good in Siena until we get to the bubonic plague in 1348, which hits Siena particularly badly. If you look at this cathedral, there was a plan in 1340 to enlarge the cathedral to make it the Super Duomo, whereas the nave was going to become one of the transepts, and the transept was going to become the nave. And that's why when you go to Siena, you see this funny structure here that looks almost like a ruin. That was going to be the facade here. and these the two side walls. So they were never able to finish it because Siena lost 60% of her population in the bubonic plague. And then remember Florence. Florence has never gotten over it. And in 1554, Duke Cosimo, when he became a duke in the Battle of Marciano, completely destroyed Siena, and Siena succumbed to Florence. And much to the chagrin of the Sienese, the Medici balls are forever on the facade of Town Hall. I always think they should remove them. But that glory days of Siena is over. But I have to say the history of Siena is woven together with something called the Palio that is still celebrated twice a year in Siena. I'm sure most of you are aware of it, where it all comes back to the memory of the Sienese. It goes all the way back to the beginnings of the 13th century when they would do, it wasn't a horse race, but they would have boxing matches and bull fights. Now, of course, you have 17 contrade, which are the different teams of Siena. And you're born into a contrade. And on July 2nd and August 16th, the pageant begins. Their teams are selected by caste, and the Palio begins, and the city for really most of late June and into August is filled with pageantry, and they even bring the horses into the churches to be blessed. And they take it very, very seriously. Here is the Campo filled with fans at the time doing the run. And I hope this works because I brought a very short clip to end with to give you an idea of what the Palio was like.
Finally, it was time. 3 laps around the piazza to claim glory for the Contrada. The horses exploded from the starting ropes, except for the unicorn's horse, Nobile Nilo. It's passed by nearly everyone in the field, including the owl's horse. But that slow start would prove advantageous. Remember the curve of St. Martin? Wild horses! Nobile's unintended strategy worked to perfection. 6 of the fastest horses, including the owls, all tried to take the curve of St. Martin at once. Though they'd all make it back to their feet, they were out of the running. Nobile was one of the 4 horses in the rear who made it through the turn without incident. It was down to 4 horses competing for the Palio win. Through the chaos and confusion, we finally discovered that the Valdemontone Contrada had claimed victory. In keeping with tradition, they marched to the Siena Duomo to celebrate their victory with the masses. But there was more than one winning Contrada that Palio Day, as our friends from Leo Corno celebrated victory over their hated rivals. Beat the owl, beat the owl. Even in defeat, the unicorns were happy, but hopeful that one day soon, victory would again be theirs. It is life. It is luck. It is the Palio.
I hope you all enjoyed that presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes. And everyone, if you have questions, you can put it in the chat box, and I will also give you the opportunity to unmute yourself, so you can also talk to us. Yes, that's right.
What's the name of the race?
called the palio.
Palio.
It comes from the term palladium, which is a piece of cloth that is awarded to the victor. And it's really a fabulous tradition. It's not for tourists. It's very much alive and well in Siena. And if you ever have the opportunity, I watched it on television because it's very hot, and standing in the middle of that campo, I don't know if I would have the nerve, but it's very much alive and well.
Palio, is it P-A-L-I-O or?
A-L-I-O, palio.
Yeah, good. It is very hot that time of the year. Yeah, somebody said we really like, oh yeah, think you love the buon governo and mal governo contrast. That was great.
Yeah, I do too. That's one of my very favorite things in all of Italy. And they're doing a restoration right now, but it seems to be almost imminent, the finish of it.
Yeah, maybe before the summer. I hope for every one of us, it's an inspiration to go to Tuscany. I know some people here are traveling there, and Siena is a must-see. Will there be more presentations like this, perhaps of more Italian cities? Yeah, we hope to. Next year
Yeah,
or sooner. Yes.
Happy to do it. We can do some places a little bit off the beaten path, like Ravenna or Padua. There's lots of.
Yeah, Arezzo was also interesting. We made our first trip to Italy last September, but did not visit Siena. Looks like we must return to Siena. Oh, we just said, yes, that will be great. You are able to unmute yourself, so you can speak to us directly if you don't want to use the chat box or if you have a question.
If you don't want to travel so far, there's a restaurant in Shelton, Connecticut called Il Palio, and there are murals all over of that race on the walls of the restaurant.
Fabulous. Wow, that's great.
Oh,
wonderful.
Take note of that. Shelton. Thank you. That's a great tip. Anyone else who wants to speak or has a question? Yeah, Ruth.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful trip. It really brought Italy back to my memory, which has always been wonderful. And I remember being at Il Palio once, a very hot August. And I was wondering, why is Siena the only place where they have, since the Ferragosto is in general celebrated everywhere. Mm-hmm. Why only Siena having that kind of tradition?
Well, there are other races and festivals throughout Italy, but remember, it's always about the Virgin Mary. And the 15th of August is the Assumption of the Virgin Mary Day.
Right.
Yeah, it's always about the Virgin.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And Elaine, Santa Caterina is also buried somewhere in Siena. Is that the patron saint, or?
She's one of the patron saints, but Saint Catherine of Siena, can't remember her when she died, but it was pretty early 1400s. Her head is in Siena.
Yeah, that's
at the church of Saint Catherine's in San Domenico, just on the edge of town. Her body is in Rome at Santa Maria sopra Minerva, but officially wherever your head is where you're officially buried.
Uh-huh. Thank you.
Yes.
Little detail that you might find interesting.
Yeah, I remember we went there and saw her head then, right? Okay, anyone else questions or remarks or?
Also the cuisine, in Siena is, it's Tuscan, but it's a little bit different. That cake I showed you, the round cake, you have to try that. It's just wonderful. It weighs a ton. And then there's something called ricciarelli, which are lovely almond-based cookies. And they make hand-rolled pasta called pici. And they have this special kind of pig called the cinto sinese that has a round, I guess it's dark, a round band around its belly. And it makes the best prosciutto, and they say, in all of Italy.
And they do a good job with the mushrooms too, the porcini.
True.
Craig has a question here. The intense geological history of Italy has created numerous beautiful quarries of marble. My favorite is yellow sienna. How close to the city is the quarry, and is this stone is it ubiquitous? That's difficult for me. In Siena.
Sienna yellow, that's right. That would be just south, going towards Maremma. You know, it's whoever said that, that's a good question. You know, all these Tuscan towns, I always like the geology as well of the Italian city-states. You just have to look around, and things are obviously built with whatever material was the closest.
Yeah.
Therefore, that beautiful red is because of the rivers around Siena, burnt-Siena. It's got a clay soil. And then just south of Siena, in a place called the Crete Sinese, that's where that yellow comes from. And then it turns into travertine. Florence is much more about pietraforte, which is strong stone. You know, Pisa, Lucca is all about white, blinding white stone because it's close to the quarries of Carrara.
The marble of Carrara, right. Rita tells us that April 29, 1380 was the death of Santa Caterina of Siena.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I knew it was close to 1400. Thank you very much.
Yes. Well, then I think we have, I don't see any more questions, but Elaine, thank you. Grazie mille.
I hope you enjoyed it, everybody. I just love Siena, and join me on Art History Encounters. If you like these kind of presentations, I do them on Sundays. Sundays on the East Coast at 1 o'clock, I think it is. 2 o'clock, sorry, on the East Coast. And it's either I give the presentation or I have guests come in. And right now we're on a series dedicated to the book. Ross King gave a talk on the bookseller of Florence. Next week, I'm going to talk about literary sources from books for painting, and then we're going to move into different topics. So join me. It's free, and I'd love to have you. ElaineRuffolo.com.
Right. I was going to say the website. You just mentioned it. Elaine, grazie. Arrivederci.
There you go. Thanks for inviting me, Isabel. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Alla prossima.
Grazie mille. Ciao, everybody.
Grazie. Ciao, everyone. Thank you for joining us.